All right, welcome back everyone from the break. We can take our seats for the final panel discussion of the day. Welcome everyone to the Young Professionals panel discussion, which will be focused on roles of stewardship, hope, and knowledge in confronting climate change, particularly around drought and wildfire. We hope that this closing panel brings a fresh perspective on climate adaptation from the voices of these inspiring young professionals. We'll start by having each of the panelists come up and introduce themselves and share their personal story and their journey on how they got into their careers in resource stewardship. So let's first welcome all the panelists together: Hiʻilei, Samantha, Puakea, and Kevin.
Aloha mai kākou. Mahalo nui to PI-CASC for hosting us on this panel. My name is Hiʻilei Casco, and I am a kupa of Waiʻehu and Kaupo Maui. I'm going to share a little bit about my academic and professional mo'oku auhau today as a means to both introduce myself and my work, but also provide a glimpse of what the next generation of climate change activists and stewards might look like. I grew up on the backcountry slopes of East Maui, where I watched my kupuna steward our family homestead through what I've come to learn is known as agroforestry. This early connection to place is what really set the rest of my academic path in motion. After I graduated from Kamehameha Schools Maui in 2014, I ventured to upstate New York to study environmental science and indigenous studies at Cornell University. And while this was a big move for an island girl, many of my close friends and favorite professors were from the indigenous community there, namely the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois, who really encouraged me to explore my Native identity and what that means for my work in the environmental field, and really encouraged me to question how that influenced my perspective and approach to environmental science. And so doing so gave me the intellectual tools to critique traditional Western science and also expose me to familiar paradigms of traditional ecological knowledge, place and community-based natural resource management, and also explore larger themes of decolonization and what that meant for my island home specifically. And this learning, and more importantly, unlearning time of my life positioned me towards Indigenous resource management and policy. And so after I graduated, I came back to Hawaii to study environmental management in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management at UH Manoa, to give myself some time to really digest this type of work and explore what it looked like on the ground in my specific community. And so my master's capstone project, entitled E Kui Ka Pono, Developing Environmental Advocacy Strategies for Community-Based Natural Resource Stewards and Groups in Hawaii, sorry, that's a mouthful, really focused on supporting small community groups to effectively participate in climate change policy and also decision-making at state and local levels. And while in my master's program, I took a Hawaii water class from Professor Kupua Sproat, some of you may know her, who introduced me to the legal field and showed me the important work of bridging science and my science and natural resource background with the tools and opportunities of law and the legal system, as foreign, as complex as it seemed and still is to me. So under the guidance of my mentors, I made my way to Richardson Law School, where I'm currently pursuing Native Hawaiian law and environmental law. And among other kuleana, like going to class and learning as much as I can, I work as a research assistant at the Kahuliao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. My recent scholarship, while it's kind of changed throughout my pathway as it does as students, focuses on themes of restorative social justice, living Hawaiian culture, indigenous intellectual property and data sharing systems, as well as community-based resource management and other interdisciplinary work that continues to bridge science, law, and policy. So as you can imagine, this work is really difficult, and I'm a young opio in this field. The law, as it's commonly regarded, is rigid and mechanistic, and as I've learned, sometimes wholly inadequate for achieving justice on our terms. And so I'm constantly inspired by my peers and my mentors who persistently step into this difficult intellectual and cultural space and conversations to make space for diverse voices and also create opportunities for real on the ground change. And so while I do graduate this year, I'm still discovering what type of career I want to have, even if that means creating a new one for myself. And yet, what I do know and have always known is that as a Kanaka-ʻōiwi scholar, I want my future work to be focused on upholding and improving the protections of my Kanaka-ʻōiwi community, and which also means protecting the natural resources we've always relied upon. So that's my quick summary. Mahalo nui again for having me in this space, and I look forward to talking story with you folks today. Mahalo.
Alrighty, aloha everybody. I'm Sam Alvarado. There you go. And currently I'm a PhD student studying tropical plant and soil science, but my background is also in natural resource management. So I've been here for a little while. As you can see from my photos, I study, teach, work, and play all things Aina. I love my natural resources. I love spending time outside. Here are some photos of some of the places, people, plants, and animals that I love. I'm also a pa'u writer and a lei maker, so it's a part of what I do for fun and also a lot of the things that I truly value. My story really starts in high school, the greatest turning point in my life when I was invited to the island of Kaho'olawe when I was just a freshman. And that's where my perspective of conservation and sustainability really shifted to include Aloha Aina as its core. From this experience, I told my great grandma about it, and she could tell how much I loved it and was passionate about it. She found an article in the newspaper and she clipped it out and mailed it to me here on Oahu. She invited me to stay with her on Maui so that I could participate in the Pohai Maile internship program at Haleakala National Park. And we spent the summer going on different adventures and learning about restoration at various sites across the entire island. At the end of the summer, Kuhea Asiu, the program coordinator, asked us to write an essay about which job at the park we would want. And I started going through all of them, thinking, oh, I loved working in the nursery, but I don't think that's quite right for me. Oh, I love working here, but I don't know if I want to do this forever. And it wasn't until I went through all the jobs at the park, I realized that I wanted to be a Kuhea Asiu. I wanted to be the program coordinator. I wanted to be the one working with the kids. As I was able to work more within the park and with that team, they also took me to my very first conservation conference, which absolutely blew my mind, that everyone was already doing the work that I was so excited about. And that opportunity opened a lot of doors for me. I then was able to do different internships such as Kupu and HEA. And along the way, I also became a teacher myself, and I work for the Pueo program. And I need to give a mahalo to the Hauʻoli Maloa Foundation. As one of their fellows, I was able to pursue my master's in NREM, which was something that I never had even dreamed was possible. On the topic of drought and fire here in Hawaii, wanted to share a couple of my favorite places. When we say "Olai kawai," water is life, you can see just how true that is when you're looking at these images. I wish I could give credit to the student who designed the program on Kaho'olawe, where they were collecting pohaku and they were making these circles. This project has really been my inspiration for finding creative solutions for natural resource management problems. Obviously, Kaho'olawe land stewards have their hands full between the bombs breaking the water table, unexploded ordnance still being there, which prevents them from being able to dig, and therefore plant. It's a really challenging experience trying to grow things without soil and water. And when I think about climate change and drought, I never would have thought that the solution would have been rocks. The rocks help to collect the topsoil, prevent erosion. They slow down the water and help to retain the moisture. And they also act as an insulator and keep the temperature down for the new seedlings. In addition, even though this was a student project, it also very cleverly mimics traditional Kanaka-ʻōiwi agricultural practices, as they have also used dry stacking of pohaku in their agriculture. What led me to pursue a career it was all of these experiences and all of the people that I met along the way that really made me feel like it was even a possibility. Now as a teacher, I'm able to teach modern Hawaiian history, Hawaiian studies, outdoor education, and run a mentorship program for students who are interested in going into natural resources as their future career. The best part of it all is that I'm able to create experiences for them, just like the ones that inspired me. This is kind of my vision board for the future. I hope to be able to continue to do this work forever and continue to work with students. My dream actually mimics a lot of what Hiʻilei is doing and what her family has been able to achieve. And that is to have a homestead where I'm able to have my own place where people can come, connect to Aina, gather a sense of place, and be able to become Aloha Aina themselves. And I think that the biggest change will be when they are able to realize that they are the change that they want to see in the world. Mahalo.
Okay, aloha wina la kākou. O wau o Puakea Moʻokini-Oliveira, no Mauna Lua wai manalo mai au. I am Puakea. I come from the east side of this island, and I'm currently working towards a master's degree in environmental management, though I'll admit I'll probably never feel like a master of anything, and certainly not by May. But I can guarantee you that I'll always be a student of Haumana of Aina. And when I use the word Aina, I think of both our landscapes and seascapes since they all feed us. So I'm very humbled to be here and participate on this panel, sharing with you some aspects of my journey, but really to be able to shed light on the places and the people that have guided me along the way. So I've always been curious about the world around me. I love getting dirty. You can ask my mom, and play with animals. And growing up, I had a lot of fun doing so, working and getting into trouble, both in Mauna Lua, but also in Hakalau on Hawaiʻi Island, where my papa continues to ranch and grow kalo. So my upbringing with ohana on these Aina and in these waters shaped my inquiry. And in high school, I had the opportunity to participate in a service project planting koa seedlings in Keauhou. That service project solidified my future. I knew that no matter what I was going to be doing, I was going to get my hands dirty and do the work. I decided to study environmental science, primarily because to this day, you can never get me to decide between my love for mountains and my love for ocean. At the time, I didn't know that what I'm really passionate about is ecology and systems and how they're intertwined. So when wanting to put my love on plants on the side, I wanted to learn more about seabirds. I know, random, but in a wildlife aspect, they kind of encompass this connectivity to me. And that led me to be able to participate and serve as a biological field crew lead for the Fish and Wildlife Service on Pihe Manu in Papahana, Mokuakea. Something that I am proud to this day of being involved while on Pihe Manu was coordinating a group of youth that were earning their GED equivalencies at the time to come out to Midway for a 2-week intensive service learning project. And what that experience taught me was how much I loved engaging with people in place and building relationships and capacities for youth. From there, I literally and figuratively dove right into a position as a conservation technician in Ha'ena at Limuhuli Garden and Preserve in Halelea on Kauai. I was primarily working on a riparian restoration project that involved planting native, endemic, and culturally important species, as well as monitoring the stream and our native aquatic animals. For the past 4 years, I've been so lucky to be hana'd by our organizations and communities of practitioners based on Kauai that each turn their hands to the work. A main driver for why I returned to academia stems from the attitudes of place-based perspectives and indigenous knowledge systems And specifically, one outcome of our work is to further strengthen our collective relationships to wai, to water, the true connector of places and people and everything in between. So I'll end by saying that there are many more lessons to come and relationships to form, but I can tell you that I have never, nor will I ever be doing it alone, but for the places and people that continue to feed me in more ways than one. Mahalo nui.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Faccenda. I'm a graduate student here at UH Manoa, where I'm obtaining my PhD in botany. I grew up in Pennsylvania and got my undergrad degree over there. I started off like with my interest in environmental science and biology in high school. Over there, they had this program called the Envirothon, teaching high school students about different aspects of wildlife and ecology and aquatic systems. They had a section on forestry, like identifying different plants and like the typical forest management practices and things like that. And they also had an invasive species section, which kind of stuck with me, as you'll see. So from there, I went to Millersville and started working in the herbarium there. For those who don't know, herbarium is a pressed plant collection, kind of like a plant library. And so I learned all about the different invasive species in the area and the native species. And because it's like a historical collection, they had things going back to the 1800s. You could see how the flora is changing based on these preserved specimens. And that really stuck with me as I moved through life. So once I finished in Millersville, I applied all over looking for different ways to interact with invasive species and ended up coming here. Hawaii is kind of known as the invasive species capital of the world, and I thought there would be plenty of good research to do here, and there definitely is. So now I'm working in Kurt Daler's lab, focusing on invasive grasses specifically. And so there's a big connection to fire there, obviously. So some of my research is looking at how these invasive grasses are changing across the landscape, which ones are expanding, how they might expand in the future and potentially alter fire regimes as they expand. So one of the projects that I've worked on that was funded by PI-CASC was this fire weed risk assessment. So if you ever heard of the weed risk assessment, it's kind of ranking invasive species in terms of how bad they are based on different criteria. This is kind of extending that, but specifically for fire. So which plants are known as like most fire promoting, so we can try to prevent these excessively fire promoting plants from spreading. And so we finished that project and ended up assessing around 300 different species across the island, or that are known to occur on the islands. Some of them are widespread. We assess things like guinea grass, but also some things that are only known from a small populations or recently established populations. So we can hopefully prevent those from spreading even further now that we know that they're going to be especially problematic. And talk to me more if you want to know about like the details. It's on the Pacific Fire Exchange website. And during that project, working with the grasses, I kind of realized that some of these grasses don't have proper names. Like going in the herbarium here, I'd see specimens which didn't have like the correct scientific name on them. So in order to work with these things, we need to give them a name. And so these invasive species come from all over the world. A lot of them were brought over intentionally, some accidentally. So you kind of have to scour the different plants from all over the world in order to find a match for the ones that we've got here. So with this research, I ended up finding around 45 new species of invasive grasses that people hadn't known were here. Some of them are fire promoting, a lot of them, most of them aren't, but some of them are quite problematic. And I did also some roadside surveys to detect new invasive species, which might not have been in the herbarium. So doing the actual field work to find and map some of these new populations of invasive grasses that might promote fire. Yeah, so that's a bit about my background in research, and thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing your journeys, how you got here. So we'll move on to our next question. And this is, what concerns do you have about climate change, and what critical climate change work lies ahead of us? So for this question, we'll have each of you respond, and maybe Hiʻilei, you can start.
Sure. I'm to try this thing out. Awesome. So given my work and my background, ultimately the first thing that comes to mind is our native life ways and our livelihoods and our ability to continue our practices. Because they are so, as we know, interdependent on the natural resources and our spaces and places in Hawaii, oftentimes very specific place-based. So a memory that's coming to mind is I just went fishing with my grandpa over winter break. And even, a couple years before that, we had gone to these limu beds that I went to like my whole childhood growing up. And more often as we revisit these places, they don't have the specific species that we're used to eating, or the specific fish that, used to be there even in my lifetime. And I'm only 20, I just turned 27. So protecting those resources, protect our practices, and protect our livelihoods. Excuse me. And the second one that comes to mind is definitely complacency and like this feeling of inevitability as it relates to our current climate change situation. So that's like something that's really been concerning me recently, especially like among my peers in law school, is just this like overarching sense of feeling that it's like gonna happen to us anyway, and therefore like what change can I actually make? What role do I play? And what can actually be done to overcome this really large global issue. So those are, sorry, my throat is straining right now. Those are two things that immediately come to mind. Second part of the question was about critical work. I think along those same lines, I'll kind of leap on this, is creating spaces where the next generation can feel they'll be a part of this movement in productive and positive ways. Like I said, I'm still finding a role for myself and where I kind of fit into this larger conversation. And so I think, reaching down and creating spaces for this next gen would really help us kind of envision what our climate reality will look like in terms of a career, and how we can, be a part of the conversation, even given our, experience level compared to a lot of you in this room. So yeah, does it sound?
I think my biggest concern is that we tend to react instead of being proactive about it. For us and everyone in this room, climate change, being sustainable, making these very, very important choices is our norm. It's our daily. But for a lot of my students, I know that without exposure to it, a lot of them don't know at all. And it's not a conversation that they might be having with their families. So it's hard to be able to have a proactive approach in education, in conservation, in policy, when our next generation doesn't always have access to it. So I think a lot of the critical work going forward is making connections, because there's always a little divide between everyone who has their different disciplines or is in a totally different field. So for me, it's looked like combining my two worlds, my love for Aina, for environmental science and studies, but also for education, on how can I teach this most effectively? How can I create a curriculum that's going to resonate with the students? Does this curriculum even exist yet? There's a lot of people doing great work in terms of education, but we also kind of lack a platform to share it. You are going to find bits and pieces all over. So I think having a central hub where we can compile, people can network, and access all of the amazing work that each other's producing would mean a lot and go a long way, especially for my students.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So recently I was kind of looking up a statistic for something I was working on, and it was talking about that the two most prevalent natural disasters are, opposite phenomenons, right? And we're sitting in here talking about one of them, which is drought, and the other one is being floods. And I might be a little biased because I am very interested in Hawaiʻi, but to me, the water cycle is what connects all of these issues. And on top of that, people. And so, I think to me, again, bias, but the climate crisis is a water crisis. And I think, that looks differently for each community, for each island. And then globally, that looks differently as well, because we're talking about different governance and power structures. So I guess one of my biggest concerns is the lack of urgency and understanding that. And it's hard because, we're so focused on, the specifics of our work that it's hard to sometimes think about the big picture. And because this is kind of preaching to the choir, we're all here because we already are invested in our resources and Aina or Wai or fire or plants, whatever it is. But as I'm learning, the importance of people in all of this is kind of that last puzzle piece, at least for me, was missing, because I got into this type of work so I wouldn't have to deal with people. But as I'm learning, that's just not possible. We need those relationships and understandings to each other, but also, again, thinking about that every place is different. And so I think in terms of, the critical work moving forward, it's about making sure we each know our place enough to be able to make a decision or management, plan based on that. And connecting it all through Vai.
So I have a lot of concerns about climate change. Worried about how certain species of plants might not make it. I'm worried about how ecosystems are going to be modified with the rise of these fire-prone savannas and the loss of the dry forests on the islands. I think most of all, though, it's going to be how climate change is going to affect people, because at the end, the Earth will be okay, but the people are going to have a big problem if we don't get this thing under control. How people lose connections to land, lose species which are important, have to be displaced from their homelands. Those are all the things that concern me the most about climate change. I've already gotten some good points about the critical work with making connections is really important. And I'm going to take this in a different direction and think that we've kind of engineered ourselves into this problem with CO2. And I think that we might be able to engineer ourselves out of it if we can get some chemists and physicists to try to actually cool the Earth again, or with fusion technology to make fossil fuels obsolete really quickly. So I think that some of the most the things that kind of come out of left field could be from the physics and chemistry space rather than biology in terms of reversing climate change.
Thank you all for sharing. So we're going to open it up now to the audience. If the audience has any questions, and I think Brad and Beth have microphones going around.
Yeah, thank you guys. I thought I was all in, but listening to you four, you guys make me want to go more all in. It's super inspiring. So thank you folks for sharing. My question is going to be for Hiʻilei. So Oren Lyons is one of my heroes. You're familiar with Oren Lyons?
Like, sounds familiar, but I haven't read.
He's a Haudenosaunee elder. And from him, I learned the story of the peacemaker. Actually, are you familiar with that story?
I feel like I've heard it before, but I'm not confident in saying that I know all of the details.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm going to ask this question is because today we heard the first speaker talk about building trust, building relationships. We heard a tinge of that yesterday, and I'm so happy that this conference is not just touching on the science, but it's starting to touch on the human motivations. And the Haudenosaunee and the story of the peacemaker was about these tribes that were at war with one another, and they had to somehow find a way to bridge and make peace. And the last holdout was the Onondaga. And anyway, it's really deep, but they actually inspire me in my work for our environment here. So I'm just wondering if you can share maybe anything you picked up from them and that people group, and how they, their backstory is still encouraging them to engage in a similar history of colonial displacement, but still fighting, and at the same time still trying to make peace. And what role does peace play to you in environmentalism?
Yeah, that's a great question, mahalo. So I think, okay, so initially the first thing that came to mind is just engaging with a different Native population than your own. You already feel a sense of kinship, I think, just based on a common denominator of values that we have as it relates to Aina and each other. So moving to New York, which is, you know, just a completely different state than Hawaii and a completely different community, especially academic community. I really found home with those people. One, because they understood me as an academic and as an individual, but also challenged me in the sense of, it was really cool. It was the first time I was ever exposed to Indigenous thinking on such a high academic level. So in terms of like decolonization in reality, like in our work, really questioning our own science professors, questioning our paradigms, our positionality, and our approach to how we go about connecting to land. And I knew that I had my own, obviously, relationships to Aina based off of my experiences growing up on Maui, but all I had been taught was primarily Western science. And so the idea, like, it was the first time I even recognized within myself, I had conflicting worldviews or just value systems on what is the right way to live in this world and like to live with Aina in harmony and in peace. And so that community really, I think at bottom, if I had to like give one takeaway, is to challenge me to always question how I approach my work and whether or not that aligns with fundamentally my personal and cultural values. And not only learning that through classes, like that's the first time I ever even heard of like Indigenous philosophy, you know, as an academic course, but also, you know, how do I phrase this? Remembering who I am in spaces that don't even recognize me, I guess, in a way too. So like being a woman in STEM, now in law, first generation, all these different things, watching them do it, like, and do it unapologetically, do it confidently, do it at like the highest academic level, kind of like I was saying, like created that space for me to envision that for myself. And so going back, I guess, as a last point to your point about peace, you know, I see peace as pono, as balance and as harmony, and applying that. I think as long as I try to live pono within myself and, you know, helping my fellow peers, my community to do that as well, that's small steps that I can take to tackle this larger issue of climate change that affects us locally and globally. I know that was probably a very vague, like philosophical answer, but I'll leave you with that and we can always talk story after.
Hi, thank you for your very inspiring talks, everyone. I have a question for Samantha, actually. Two questions, in fact. First one would be if you could, the PUEO program sounds really interesting. If you could share a little bit about that, that would interest me. And then also the idea you have for sort of a community space to bring people together and, to teach skill shares maybe, or could you elaborate on that? Could you give me a better idea? That would be really great. Thank you.
Definitely. The PUEO program is an amazing program. It's funded by the Clarence T.C. Ching Foundation, and we operate out of Punahou School, but all of the scholars that attend come from underserved public schools. So essentially they get to come on scholarship to Punahou for the summer. Every summer, we're normally at 6th to 12th grade, but this upcoming summer, we're going to invite our very first cohort of 5th graders, which is really exciting. And that's going to be the outdoor education program. So we're currently designing it right now. But once they get to high school, they also have the opportunity to earn high school and college credits while they're still in school. I started off as a TA. So one of the students I had when I was just a TA, she actually graduated an entire year early, thanks to the PUEO program, the different support that she had, taking summer school every summer. So it's phenomenal. And it's so inspiring when you see students take full advantage of that opportunity. And every summer they take a different course. So they also get exposure to all different types of topics. I just happen to teach history and outdoor education. As for my future dream vision, in I think a lot of spaces here, especially in Hawaii, with a lot of nonprofits and different groups, I've started to see the term learning farm kind of pop up, and that's what I've been kind of playing with and researching. For me, the end goal is to have a space where I can live, work, play, because my life is always divided. I'm, I guess, full-time, but I feel like there's so much divide between the work that I do as a student versus as a teacher versus running the mentorship program versus, what I want to be when I grow up, essentially, is to combine all of those three things. So I don't feel like my time and effort is split amongst different organizations and different people in different places, because I feel like they don't get the best version of myself or the highest quality work that I'm able to provide them with. I envision being able to host field trips, farm tours, but also having different plots where each garden might be themed, where you could come in, you could walk the lei garden, harvest everything that you need, and take a workshop on the spot. You could come in, walk through the veggie garden, take a cooking class, and share a meal together. I think that, especially for students, creating a sense of place and a sense of belonging goes such a long way, and that by having different themed gardens, they would be able to find different interests. And I'm okay that I know that my students are going to go off, and as much as I want them to go into natural resources, they have so many different interests. But I think that the beautiful thing about natural resources is that it contributes to everything. I always ask them, do you like having clean water? Do you like having fresh air? Then natural resource plays a really large role in your life. And once they realize that I think that they're kind of in control of their own education, is their aha moment, when they realize it's not just busy work, but that the work that they're doing is real and matters to the real world. Thank you.
Thank you folks all for being here. One of the things I've noticed in all of your concerns are concerns of social or civic engagement with the climate crisis. And for the first time, I'm a person without children. I don't have a lot of contact with kids. And this year I have a teaching fellowship at Iolani School. And I have been stunned by the lack of engagement, both civic engagement and engagement with the climate crisis and ecology generally amongst my students. And I'm wondering it's been a long time since I was a kid in Hawaii. I'm in my mid-50s, and I'm wondering what you folks see as a possibility today to engage the young, the K through 12 age group here in these concerns so that they can become invested in living with the land as a principal force in their life. That's it.
I can start. Sadly, it is true. There are very few places, spaces, and courses when it comes to both environmental work and civics. Typically in high school, if you attend a public school, you might get one semester of each. And then the content that you receive is based largely off of your teacher or your kumu that you have. I would love to have more required coursework within the K through 12 because it's easily pushed aside as something extra or fun, or the field trip you go on one time, and it's hard to get that deeper dive into the significance. I think a great place for students of any age to start really would be learning how to write testimony. There's several different organizations and nonprofits that collaborate to help give civics and testimony workshops to youth. And the legislators absolutely love it. Being able to hear from the kids. I know that when they're looking at all the bills and everything is fast paced, they're making rapid decisions. I've seen them all just put everything down, smile, engage critically. And when you have these haumana that have the facts, they can tell you the percent of this, they can tell you what species names, what places they come from, or they share their personal experience of the aina that they grew up on. It contributes to aha moments for policymakers who also might have had that experience on where, okay, climate change is bad, and that's their only experience that they've had with aina or sustainability or climate change. So now we're seeing our youth have an even greater voice and even more power. It's a fun place to start.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. So I feel like I'm just getting re-involved in community work and, learning from people and organizations that have been doing this decades long and inspired by how they approach it. And so kind of one of my sheroes and all of the people that are involved in one of the organizations I work with, Namako Nauna, they emphasize, both this place-based engage education, but as well as civic engagement that I think you're talking about, but in a different lens. And that's founded in, a sense of place and building capacity. To me is not just curriculum. I think building capacity is how do we create jobs for everyone? How do we create programs that we can train and then it could live on? And so a lot of the work that we're doing, with other organizations and learning along the way, an outcome of the project that I'm working on for my master's is to create a OEV-based stream monitoring toolkit. And the hope for that is, not only again to build capacity for us to learn, at any age, we all can reassess and know how to, use a YSI or dip our heads into the stream if it's clean enough for you to do so. But really the founding of that is also that we don't just create tools and programs to use, because it sounds good, but because there's a need for them, that the places that we use those tools and programs want that, or again, that's a gap to be filled. So I feel like it's a fine line with, as you're saying, civic engagement and teaching, okio and engaging them, not just in that, teaching sense, but yeah, really equipping them to take our jobs in the future, right? And making sure it's long term. So yeah, that's just my perspective.
Really quickly, I'm not sure if you folks are familiar, there's a very recent court case called Navahine v. State. And it's basically a youth plaintiff-led case against the Hawaii government and the Department of Transportation, all led by youth under 18. So I think that's like also a really great example of, you know, obviously not everyone can bring a case to the Hawaii Supreme Court, but it just shows like how youth can get involved in ways that we might not have ever conceived of before, especially like in the legal realm. So I think that's super exciting to me. That's like really motivating and inspiring to me, just because it's, I think, what's necessary to, you know, really get the ball rolling.
Any other audience questions? Oh. Could one of the mic people from that? Yeah.
Sorry.
So I just want to start off by saying I really love what you guys talked about with community engagement, with engaging younger generations, and really thinking forward into the future of who's going to take over this kind of work. But I noticed there's a really big problem in talking about climate change, especially with that community outreach, with misinformation. And in my personal experience, one of the issues is that any Google scientist can go and look up and find all these articles that support their position, and they can get them for free, but these aren't peer reviewed, they aren't very scientific, or they're doing poor science. And then when you go to get information that's legitimate and peer reviewed, it's always behind a paywall. So what are your guys' thoughts on that, or just how to kind of combat misinformation in new ways, or just what do you think about all that?
I think before we even start reading anything, at least in my course, we have a discussion on how to identify a credible source. So I think starting with that education, equipping the students with the tools themselves can go a long way. I have gotten copied and pasted Wikipedia essays, and it's not because they're not capable. It's because that they didn't even know better or where to start. So that's huge. I've seen a push for open access educational resources and articles, which I'm always immensely grateful for. And it's nice that it trickles down through me, but I'm in a unique position where I'm a teacher and a student at the same time. So what do teachers do when they don't have that access to the UH library and it's not free anymore? It's super challenging, but I've also seen smaller communities develop, which has been hard, especially during COVID. But when you have a friend in the law school, you have a friend in NREM, you have a friend, I think that being in college, I always say like, that's the most critical component of it, is that community, because now your accessibility to those resources is further opened and can be shared or at least talked about. It is definitely a challenge because there's a lot out there. And just teaching them like how to navigate it successfully, because you can even find credible research being shared on social media. So then they have to further know, okay, which profile should I follow? Who should I believe? What is fake news? But I've seen even my youngest brother, he's 13. I've seen him go up to other people or even my dad and say, oh no, that's fake news. And I'm like, wow, when I was 13, I wouldn't have even been thinking about what is or what isn't fake news. So I think that can be really powerful.
I don't know if I can really speak to the misinformation bit, but just I feel added to, you know, I feel the other part of what you're saying, which is just in general, like how do we talk about climate change in the public? And you know, a lot of conversations that I've been overhearing or a part of, I think have brought up good points where we need to meet the public at whatever level and capacity they can engage at. And so, you know, we can go down to the weeds with the numbers and the models, and that's fun too, to us, right? But I think from a person's perspective, what does that mean for their day-to-day life? What does a drought mean for my water bill? What does a fire mean for my means of getting to work and my commute or whatever it is. I think I have, I always kind of laugh and excuse me, but when we talk about science communication, because to me, I feel that communication and writing it should just be at a level that anyone can understand. And I think that maybe is a little hard when we're so trained to think in, a very rigid sense or a way of writing. But I think that is connected to that whole level of trust building. And as far as for, kids and engaging them in how to think critically, I think part of that is, really engaging or making use of the relationships that we have that will be, people that they would look up to. So, for example, if depends who you are and where you're from, but, you might listen to a certain teacher or community member more than you might, your school teacher, or just to be honest, I know sometimes that was it for me. So it's like, how do we let those kind of roles come out in, the things that we're trying to bring to light in terms of how we change in our actions. So I think that was a really long, convoluted answer, but that's just that's what comes to mind when I think of how do we talk about climate change, because it just needs to be real for someone, and that looks differently.
I'm going to try to use the microphone. Can you hear me? Aloha, thank you. This panel has been really fascinating. And the question that was just raised made me think of, before I took this job, I was also involved with a group that was called the Global Young Academy that was about 200 scientists from around the world from different countries. And one of the things that they spoke about frequently was the desire, it wasn't exactly to dissolve nationalities, but it was to be seen as global citizens rather than to be seen as a German citizen or to be seen as a Chinese citizen. They thought of themselves as as people who were engaged beyond their nationality as an identity. And I just wondered, I mean, clearly what we're facing here is huge, and anybody who's focused on, a local solution, like that is the world as well. I'm not suggesting that there is an imperative to scale up, but I wondered if you could speak at all to scale and to what our kuleana is, to the region, to the world, to people beyond our local community, and if that exists in your worldview. Thank you.
I don't have an answer. I mean, for sure answer, but I have an idea of what that brings to mind. And I think maybe even Christian might be able to speak more about this, but someone who, I'm not sure if everyone in this room has heard of Palau Ohia and Kumukekuhi and the Kanaka-Ole family, but I feel that that is a big first step for a scientist to be able to engage at a level that is digestible. Because, when it comes to customary practices, yes, there are certain things we should be aware of and not just jump right in. But at the same time, what I love about their philosophy is that, you don't have to be from a certain nationality or, certain blood to have these values of caring for your place. We are all, to me, mixed at this point, but we should all care about the place that sustains us. And I think just at that base level of thinking about those connections, I don't know, I think it raises a higher degree of like connectivity with the world, because recognizing though that it's not all easy and that we can't all just do that and have those viewpoints change and everything will be okay, because there are harms that are happening. But I think if we can at least engage at that level, that if we care about the place we live, do we want to keep living here, and engage in that way, then it might be a little bit easier to think globally. But I think before thinking globally, we need to also have a little bit of urgency locally as well.
I think that is such a great question. I think the way that I'm conceptualizing that is basically how do we instill a sense of kuleana in every single person in the world, basically. And, you know, fundamentally, I think that's establishing relationships to aina wherever they may be. And it's especially difficult for people who live in cities or really highly populated areas because nature is not as common as we see it here in Hawaii. And so maybe we need to, you know, think critically about like, what is nature and what is our environment, and expanding it beyond, you know, what we know as like our mountains and lakes and gardens and stuff like that. And using that potentially as a way to start instilling the sense of relationship and therefore responsibility. So, yeah.
Okay, we have one more question that we'd like each of you to answer briefly to close off the panel. And that is, what brings you hope in taking on climate change? So let's go reverse order. Maybe Kevin, you can start, and then we'll finish with you, Hiʻilei.
The main thing that brings me hope is that we have lots of people. We have thousands of people working on this problem, attacking it from all different angles, from the chemical to the social to the geographical, and all that work is immensely important. And it's fantastic that it's all being funded and happening, and it's continuing to expand. The CASCs are funding lots of people. There's lots of other organizations and conservation organizations that are growing. At least like conservation in Hawaii, it's kind of hitting a critical mass where more people are getting into it, more funding is becoming available, and it's inspiring to see all of this change happening. Another thing that brings me hope is the Inflation Reduction Act that gave a lot of money for climate change mitigation, and the fact that something like that was actually able to happen at a national level is really big.
I guess one thing that I'd like to share in regards to this question, I was fortunate to go to a water resiliency conference last fall, and something that Dr. Aurora Kagawa-Viviani said from the geography department was that, you know, we're going to need you know, social and technical innovation. And of course, this was talking about water issues, but I feel like that's applicable to anything. And I think the emphasis on saying that like social innovation first, because what we were just kind of highlighting throughout this panel was the importance of people in the science, in the work. And so when I think about that though, I'm not sure that, you know, I'd like to think we don't have to start from scratch. We have a really good foundation already, whether that's, you know, indigenous or local knowledge or the scientific community and the things that are being done now. It's just, again, how do we bridge that all together and talk to each other and not be so siloed? I think a second part to that, one of my kumu talks about, Dr. Kamana Beamer talks about having courage. And I think is that final little like push to how do we do the hard things. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, with all of those tools in our tool basket, we can come together. It's just, yeah, finding that fire to be courageous. And I think, again, highlighting not only people in place, but the places themselves. I think we need to be better listeners and add that in the context of our work as well.
I think what gives me the most hope is how resilient, how maybe even like my students, they're just such critical thinkers, even at such a young age, and they have a really deep level of just emotional intelligence. And this, it's amazing to me. And that with their new perspective and their attention to details, their genuine like empathy for their peers and their community, it translates so well into developing a sense of place, a sense of community, a sense of identity, where now you have this amazing familial structure within their community where the haumana are teaching, their kupuna, their parents, their grandparents, but there's also indigenous knowledge systems that are being passed down. So you just have this amazing, like multi-circular transfer of knowledge that's going on, with just like a little bit more of their ability to have like a deep pilina, a deep understanding, and this increased awareness. I think having access, giving them access to these places, to these communities, to these people, and they'll take care of the rest. They give me the most hope.
I definitely concur with all of my co-panelists. I mean, that's like, yeah, very all-encompassing. I think ultimately what I always come back to is my wahipana in Kaupo Maui and how much resilience that little place has, like against all odds of drought, like heavy rainfall, high wind, invasive species coming in and, decimating our grass and all of our, erosion shrubs and all of, it's amazing what we can learn from kiloing every day and really being interconnected and a part of the places we love and are a part of. So I think I can speak for all of us that, Hawaii in general really is, and the perseverance of Hawaii is what really gives us hope now. Mahalo.
Mahalo, everyone. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Mahalo. And I will pass it off to Darren and Mary Vaughn to close off. So once again, thank you.
First. Aloha. Thank you. Mahalo. It's been great. I'm sure Darren will say the same things and say them louder. But I just would like to say I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today and to stick through to that moment of light at the end that wasn't a fire, but was was the opportunity that these young panelists shared with us today. So I look forward to tomorrow, and I don't need to say everything except for, again, thank you, and I'll let Darren say it again.
But louder.
Louder.
So I just lean into the mic. And no, one words I think really take care of it. I mean, some of the things that just stuck out for me today were the importance of partnership, the importance of developing relationships. And no offense to, the day was great, and no offense to anybody who spoke. But man, the last panel, right? Mary Vaughn mentioned tomorrow, and Beth reminded me too. Yeah, here tomorrow we start at, help me Brad, 12 o'clock for the second part of our science summit with some really cool topics focused on integrated watersheds. And where are you pointing to me to? And yeah, you're pointing me to those signs. I'm going to do it without them. Integrated watersheds and sea level rise. Also, actually, because tomorrow's day 3 of Climate Week, day 2 of our science summit. Is that confusing enough? That's good. But in the morning tomorrow is the Pacific Island Women Leaders at COP27 Outcomes and Ways Forward. That's here somewhere in this building. It's in this room tomorrow at 9:30. The last thing I was going to say, but I've lost track. There was a gentleman sitting right here named Christian. Where'd he go? Really? There he is. He didn't leave. You know, what's really interesting is we PI-CASC reached out to various people who have expertise and knowledge and talent. And we said, hey, why don't you come together with us and let's try to create these pieces. And today's piece was really, I mean, we're talking Alyssa and Christian. And somehow Christian, until this moment, avoided the microphone. Get up here and share your thoughts and wisdom with us, please, about the day. Anything between 1 and 150 words about what you loved about today.
Love the panelists. Really want to mahalo the panelists. Ryan, Kapua, Elliot, and all of you guys, mahalo for your time. And I don't have anything to add that they didn't say beautifully.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see everybody tomorrow, right?
We'll see you tomorrow.
All right.
Have a good one.